Right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Standardized Rights Statement Implementation 101. We are the DPLA Rights Statements Working Group. Next slide, please. So we're going to do a round of introductions for all the presenters, and then we'll get started on what we're going to present to you today. So I'm Jody Allison Bunnell. I'm head of archives and special collections at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana.
I'm Gabe Golson, technology projects librarian at Temple University Libraries, and I worked with DPLA through PA Digital and as co-chair of the Rights Statements Working Group.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Moore, and I'm a research services librarian at the University of Notre Dame.
Hello, I'm Julia Simic, Director of Digital Library Services for the University of Oregon Libraries.
Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy Smith. I'm the Moving Image and Sound Archivist at the Robert S. Cox Special Collections and University Archives Research Center at UMass Amherst.
All right, thank you everyone. Next slide. To move on to an overview of what we'll be presenting today, we're going to look first at what are rights statements, a little bit about how they've emerged, tell you a little bit about the benefits of implementation and some of the resources that are available to help you with implementation, along with some of the challenges that are inherent to the process of implementation. Next, please. So before we can answer what the rights statements are, I'll start with a different question. It's a simple question that cultural heritage institutions are regularly asked, which is, how can I use this? As a library or archive or museum, our mission is to inspire the creation of new works, information, new aesthetics, new insights and understandings to advance the progress of knowledge and society. That is our broad shared mission. So we execute on this mission by making our collections as broadly available as possible and potentially primed for use and reuse. One way to encourage the use and reuse of collections is to be really clear with our users and researchers about what we know about an item, including copyright status. Next, please. So when DPLA was first envisioned in around 2010, there was no standardized way to communicate copyright status to users. Instead, most metadata systems had and have a free text field for rights statements, and users were really left to fend for themselves. So yes, this slide is blank because that is what we had before. Next, please. Although this was a problem spread across cultural heritage institutions, which is the broad term that we will be using to refer to this group of institutions, it really became a significant problem when we started aggregating our collections. Not just the US aggregations, but aggregators like Europeana in Europe and Trove in Australia. So this is the secret sauce of bringing together our collections. It's really a fantastic way to see how practices that make sense at the local level just don't work at a larger scale. We might be creating metadata so that it presents in a specific system. We may have understood a standard, or we may have some very specific user need that we are focused on when we create this metadata at our institution. When it goes places, we get to learn things. Next, please. So DPLA now has about 100 million items, 1 million items, and we have data across these aggregations on 100 million items. So we've been able over the last 10 years to do a pretty decent job aggregating the metadata about our collections so users can search all of our collections in a single place. What we were not thus doing such a great job at is sharing with our users what we know about the copyright status of our collections. So think back. Think of our user, our researcher, and counting 100 million items from thousands of contributing partner institutions who want to use content in a manner consistent with copyright laws, and they're asking us tough questions. They're encountering these items and asking, can I use this and how? Next, please. So institutions contributing to DPLA have used thousands of different rights statements to describe their assets. This is a visualization, which is now a few years old, of these statements, but it gives us a sense of how messy this was. Another measure is that 25% of the words that contributing institutions use were concentrated in a single field. You'd hope that that field would be in the description of the item, but only 22% of the words we used were in description. 25% of the words we used were devoted to the rights statements. So we would also hope those rights statements would have been really helpful. Let's look at a few that were in place before the rights statements work began in earnest to see if those words were well spent. As an aside, we're not picking on any institutions. The contrast with what we have now is important. Next, please. Our first example is just very, very long. Additionally, does it answer the question, can I use this? No, it does not. Next, please. Here's another example that's for a map created in 1787. Clearly, this map is well past copyright. Clearly, it's in the public domain. Click, please. But you'll notice Digital Copyright 2013, all rights reserved. This is a really common practice by many institutions. But at this point, it's quite well established that no new rights are created when digital photos or scans are taken of cultural heritage work, when the intention is to faithfully copy the original. So this one is also really contradictory. Again, it does not answer the question, can I use this, with any accuracy? Next, please. Here, we've got another example. Click. Some materials may be protected by copyright. There might be other restrictions imposed by donor agreements or other things. This doesn't really give a lot of information. So we are not picking on any institution because, again, everybody did this at one point in time. Next, please. So the question is, why have we done this to ourselves and our patrons? First, there's a tradition of archives and special collections as a locus of control. Click. The idea is that we have to control our collections and even be gatekeepers. Click again, please. As part of responsible stewardship. That's a really strong idea that we've had for a long time. It also predates the internet and ideas about sharing and remixing content. Second, we have a very strong idea as a profession that we have terribly high liability in these matters. All of our researcher registration systems, copy request forms, for a long time have removed all liability for copyright infringement from us and on patrons. We have mentally stepped far, far away from making any copyright determinations ourselves. And that's based on a notion that it's more risky to make determinations rather than an understanding that not making determinations makes our collections less available for use. Now that's risk. We imagine terrible legal trouble for our institutions. But based on both case law and some of the excellent published works on this topic, we know that for most of our materials, if we make a mistake in a copyright determination, it's not going to result in great harm to us or our institutions. So with all of these problems and questions in mind, a group of DPLA and Europeana contributors came out together to work out these problems. And the result is right statements. But first, I'm going to pass the presentation baton to Jeremy, who's going to discuss something related but a little different, which is Creative Commons licenses. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jody. So yeah, before we talk about right statements, I want to talk about Creative Commons. You've probably heard about Creative Commons. Maybe you know a little bit about it. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. This might be a refresher or something new. Creative Commons basically provides a set of licenses that allows creators, so people who create any kind of intellectual property, to communicate what rights they reserve and which ones they're happy to let other creators use. And again, this is the rights holder, whoever is the creator of the item in question, is the one who determines that. Next. And there are essentially 4 Creative Commons licenses that can be combined in different ways. So you can have 1 or 2 or all 4. And I think, yeah, there's a total of 6 that you can, combinations that you can do. So attribution essentially means that's the most open one. I'm happy to let people use this as long as they give me credit. Share alike means whatever license you've assigned to it as the rights holder, you want people to use that, keep using that same license. So they couldn't make it a CC by NC if you didn't make it a CC by NC. And then non-commercial is the other one. That's you let people copy and distribute it as long as it's for non-commercial works. And then no derivatives. You essentially are saying you can use this, but please don't change it. So if it was a painting, don't paint an emoji over the face of my painting. I want it to, you can use it, but just keep it in this state. Next slide. And this is the range of all the licenses from the sort of most open version, which is a CC BY. Again, no questions asked, just give me credit. You can do whatever you want to it. And then as you go higher up into the red, there are more restrictions. It's still sort of technically open and available, but there's a lot of restrictions. So that last one, CC BY NC ND, that's all 4 licenses. Or sorry, that's 3 licenses. That's the most restrictive. So keep this license and don't change the work. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. And this is just, a lot of people ask like, oh, how do I have to apply to get a license, or how do I do it? If you go to this URL, creativecommons.org/choose, you can, as a creator, you can walk through and create a license that's tailored to the particular use you're looking for. And it will generate code in either HTML code or just plain text that you could copy and paste. And that's really all you need to do to quote unquote register your object. Next slide. And one thing when negotiating with donors of archival collections or any kind of donor, it's a great opportunity to offer the option of assigning a CC license to facilitate wider access. Some donors still want to control their copyright exclusively. Photographers are generally good examples of this, which is fine. But when Creative Commons is explained to donors, they're philosophically aligned with the goals of Creative Commons. And this language could be incorporated into a deed of gift. And that's what I'm showing here. This is our template here at UMass for our donor agreement, where we give people the option to share their work with us, but have a Creative Commons non-commercial license attached to it. So in this particular case, anyone could use their material without asking them for non-commercial use. But if a commercial use did come up, say someone wanted to use a photographer's image in a textbook, they would still need to contact the creator. So it's worth it to maybe make the copyright permissions process for the republication of the material to be potentially easier. Next slide. And there's even a variant of Creative Commons that's not really a license, but it's really just a waiver of rights. So that's CC0. So that's Creative Commons has this option where you can essentially say, I'm putting my work out into the public domain right off the bat. And that's a dedication. So the rights holder determines that. But there's more than one Creative Commons product that adds a little confusion, which is the public domain mark. This is the one product that isn't used by a rights holder, but is instead used by a third party. And this has been interpreted to mean a worldwide public domain. So that's not specifically that a rights holder would do, but just a determination through law around the world. Next slide, please. And just to mention, you know, in the spirit of Creative Commons was somewhat inspired by the open source software movement. And so you see here just some examples of software that's open source. So this is a openly licensed code, essentially, that allows people to access the code and create different things with it. There's also a license called traditional TK labels, traditional knowledge labels. And these allow either cultural heritage institutions with native items or artifacts to make a determination that these are held by an indigenous community, or TK labels also allow indigenous communities themselves to apply certain rights to their objects. And we won't go into great detail about that, but this is just another type of label that is possible. Next slide. And however, you know, Creative Commons can be somewhat complicated, and it doesn't apply to every specific scenario. And as many of you know, we've inherited things where there are no donor agreements and we don't know who the rights holders are, so the rights holder can assign a Creative Commons license. And maybe we want some more granularity on some of those public domain things, or we want to add some variant. Or maybe we've gotten something by a donor, but there's specific restrictions on the use that they have that are very specific. And, you know, maybe some of reuse rights that we have negotiated with our donors don't necessarily fit into any of those Creative Commons license. So there's a hole we need to fill. Next slide. So this is where rights statements comes in. So this is sort of the bulk of what we're going to be talking about today. And there are 3 flavors of rights statements. There's in copyright, no copyright, and other. So we'll go into each one of those in detail. Next slide. So we'll start with in copyright. In this category, you'll find the basic in copyright statement, which is a couple orphan work statements and statements where the institution applying the statement has secured permission from the rights holder to allow others to make specific kinds of uses, like education or non-commercial, which is similar to Creative Commons. So in copyright, that's pretty self-explanatory. EU orphan work, this indicates that the item has been identified as an orphan work under the terms of the EU Orphan Works Directive. So this is targeted towards institutions that can use the directive. And it indicates that the item has been identified as in copyright, but its right holders either can't be identified or can't be located, which is a lot of things in cultural heritage institutions. Next one is, sorry, go back. Yeah. Next one is unknown rights holder, which is pretty self-explanatory. We don't know who the rights holder is, so we're just indicating that. Educational use permitted. This indicates the item is in copyright, but educational use is allowed without the need to obtain permissions. This is likely in situations where rights holders have permitted an institution to allow users to make educational use. So this is, again, some agreement that's been made ahead of time. And then the last one, non-commercial use permitted. This is very similar to the Creative Commons non-commercial. Again, allowed to use without permission. Next slide. This is the no copyright section. You'll find a basic public domain statement, but you'll also find no copyright in the US and flavors of no copyright, but other restrictions apply. Institutions sometimes agree to limit downstream uses of digital images in exchange for digitization services. So that sometimes is why these are used. So first one is no copyright in the US, non-commercial use only. It's in the public domain, but the organization that published the work is contractually required. So this is, again, something that maybe is in the public domain, but it was given to them by the donor that only wants non-commercial use by third parties. And this is usually part of projects like Google Books in the European Union use that designation. Third one is there are other known legal restrictions. So it indicates that the underlying work is in the public domain, but there are known restrictions imposed by laws other than copyright on the use of the item by third parties. Again, this is targeted at institutions outside the US. And then the last one is this is some kind of the work's in the public domain, but the organization that has published the item is contractually required to restrict certain forms of use by third parties because of a donor agreement. Next. And then the last one, these are sort of the, I have no idea section. It's undetermined. So copyright not evaluated, it indicates that the data provider didn't evaluate the copyright and the related rights status. Undetermined means this is really to use only when no copyright status whatsoever could be determined. So you did a little bit of investigating and you determined we just can't figure it out. And then the last one is you believe for whatever reason that no copyright or related rights are known to exist for the item, but that a conclusive determination could not be made. So in the US, this is particularly useful for archival collections with materials where the publication status isn't really clear. And all of these statements are both human readable and machine readable. And our hope is that they are adopted more by cultural institutions, cultural heritage institutions, and that over time users will become more familiar with them. You know, this is, if you've never seen these before or haven't gone into it, it seems like a lot and there's a lot of detail here, but the idea, and one of the reasons we're doing this webinar, is to educate you and encourage you to adopt some of these. So now we're going to hand it over to Monica, and she's going to talk more about why you should use these and some of the benefits. Monica?
Great, thank you very much, Jeremy. Yes, so I like to share a perspective on the benefits of working with these right statements to you, to your users, to your institution, and actually to the world at large. So it's actually, to start off with, good to say that they give you a particular kind of balance that you, as maybe the curator or steward of a collection, need to often strike, which is, how do I make things openly accessible and as usable as possible, while respecting the rights of the people who donated them or the rights holders. And so that's kind of a difficult balance, as I'm sure you understand. So this is a very valuable tool, implementing these right statements to allow you to achieve that. So if we go to the next slide, you will see a familiar question that Jody already sort of talked about, which is how can I use this? Imagining this from the user perspective, and in discovering all these things, and that naturally following on from what I can do with this particular item, right? This thing that I found, that the discovery's there, the excitement is there, but then, you know, how do we facilitate the communication around this question? So these statements, again, really help with that. So how can I use it is kind of following on from, can I use it in the first place? And so for each of these items on the slide, all objects in DPLA, you have they're very different. You have an early 19th century primer, a watercolor of Rome, from Rome. I think there's a botanical specimen here, and maybe down in the lower left corner, I believe that is an unpublished letter from the colonial period. So these are all the riches in a collection that someone might discover, and naturally wonder what they could do with, right? And so to be able to facilitate that with a right statement at that item level is really great. And they can do that on their own. So there's an independent component to this. They don't have to be a copyright expert to answer this question, because the statement and the way it's visually presented and described allows them to understand and make that determination. And they don't also have to email you or someone who's curating the digital collection as well, right? So it allows for a researcher to kind of pursue their research and give them some independence while getting an answer to this question on the slide of how can I use this. Next slide, please. So in addition to that sort of enhanced user experience, the idea that implementing these right statements improves overall discovery is really key. It's a great benefit. Once this metadata exists with other metadata at the item level, it allows you or the people you work with, your staff, to leverage that metadata to improve the user experience in many ways. What we have here on the slide is the iconic New York Public Library lion. And it is actually the portal for the New York Public Library collection, digital collection page. And we'll see here, if we go to the next slide, a little bit clearer, you can see here that they have actually made the search from the very beginning, from the first main search box. They've applied this checkbox, search only public domain materials. And so by giving the user this right from the get-go, what they're really doing is employing the power of the right statements to be able to sift the search results into a bucket that could be just immediately useful for a user. So they might not want to, even if they're being, thinking ahead and thinking, I don't know what I want to do. I might need to do a lot of things with this content. So it'd be really good to know there's no restrictions on it. So I'm going to check this box, because everything that gets returned to me, I know it's in the public domain, and I'll be able to make a decision and not worry about requirements and restrictions, which can be a very empowering thing. And even to lead with it as a digital collection, it's kind of nice to give your users that option. But it's possible and can be programmatically done, because the metadata and the right statements are implemented at the item level in your digital collection. So I believe the numbers here over something like 900,000 items, nearly. If you were to complete the search, you would get back over 300,000 digital items in the New York Public Library digital collection that are in the public domain, right? So from the get-go, you can actually leverage them to search initially in a collection. So let's go to the next slide and look at maybe another type of user experience that you can create. This is still the New York Public Library portal, but in this case, what they are doing is they're employing the search for public domain items only checkbox as part of a facet. So we would assume that they've created a different sort of user experience pathway that allows them to begin to throw in topic and key terms and those kind of searches. And then they've incorporated the sort of how you can use it, or give me only things I can do anything with, at the same level as some of the other faceting. So it's a familiar sort of user experience, but a little bit different than, say, starting off and having to make that decision. So it's just, this is the sort of the flexibility that you have when you have gone to the trouble of putting these statements with your digital collection items, is that you can be flexible and create an easier user experience for however people kind of move through your systems, right? Let's go, I think, to the next slide. We might get a closer look. So yeah, if this is difficult to see in the previous slide, the pop-out here shows you that show only public domain as a checkbox can also be applied, and it's going to obviously pull anything that has a right statement applied that meets this criteria. So next slide. So we'll jump into another example here. Again, this benefit we're talking about is really for the user, how we can communicate what they can do with items in an easy way, easy sort of intuitive way. This is another digital collection from Minnesota Reflections, I believe. And you can see in the lower left corner the actual right statement logo that is kind of at the same level or existing, as I think of it, with the other metadata that we're accustomed to seeing, such as title and author and year. It's also displayed. So right in that same sort of glance, you can get a lot of information about what the item is, but also its right status or some indication of how I can use it. So it's another great benefit is you're sort of pairing it. You don't have to click through to another page just to learn about rights. It's embedded and it lives with the digital object itself. So here we have it presented to the user as a sort of a graphic logo that they can intuit. But if they wanted to learn more, they could click on the details button here. So if we go to the next slide, I can show you what that looks like. So if a user wanted to know a little bit more and even educate themselves a little bit more about what this right status is, they can, see the textual explanation here. This is saying, okay, there's no copyright for this, I believe, photograph in the United States. And then they also are able to provide you with additional information, which is useful. There's a yes, but kind of thing going on here, where we believe it's in the public domain in the United States, and therefore you can use it without copyright. But a determination has not been made for other countries, right? So this is also a little bit of an opportunity for them, as I was saying before, for someone who is a user or researcher to know a little bit more of the nuance that sometimes comes along with copyright questions. But it's easy to read. It's not in any kind of jargon. You don't need to be a lawyer. So again, it extends the communication opportunities and the educational possibilities by the application of these right statements to an object. And then right here at the bottom of this, you can actually see a link that would link you out to more of a machine readable version of what this text is telling you. So let's go to the next screen, and we can see another example here, also from Minnesota Reflection. So you'll see it's a similar layout here that they chose to put the metadata down here. And then you have, this is an in copyright example, and Jeremy went through all these three categories. So in this case, we've got a right statement for an item that is in copyright. And you might never, once you see that, perhaps a user is ready to move on, or maybe wants to seek another. But if it is in copyright and they want more details about what that entails, what the limitations are because it's in copyright, then they can seek that information out by clicking on the details here and going and as I said, reading a little bit more about that, so they can make a better decision about how they might want to use it or not be able to use it. And again, all of this rolls up to that question of how can I use this item? So getting that knowledge at the item level for an individual thing that someone has discovered, or being able to discover things based on how you want to use it. These are two sort of use cases that are pretty powerful and are possible because we've taken the time to apply these right statements to our digital objects. Let's go to the next slide, please. And this allows me to talk about another main benefit here in sort of category benefits. So enhanced discovery, flexibility as you build out a user experience for your users and your researchers, and then the communication that's facilitated. But there's also the idea of having this metadata objects with it encoded that allows for some kind of collaboration and sharing that wasn't maybe always possible when, as Jody said, and so eloquently described when we first started doing all this a few years back, digitizing and making our collections available. So if we go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more specifically about what I mean by this enabling, which is really about getting us out of the platform that all these items might be in, the particular digital library, and making them scalable, shareable, interoperable, because we have, in addition to this, as you've seen, human readable text of the right statement, we have a machine readable version of it as well, which allows for that harvesting, that interoperability and movement and sharing between platforms, which is really pretty powerful. That's a kind of an incredible benefit that's happening all the time that we may not see. So the work you might do if you painstakingly apply something or might feel that way, has not just benefits for your immediate library, but allows that content to be shared and discovered and used appropriately, maybe somewhere else. And so I think that's a pretty incredible benefit and justification for the kind of work that this would entail. So let's go to our next slide. And this is, I think you've seen this before. This is an example, as Jody shared, of initially when we were beginning to do this, you know, the plethora of right statements and the variety made what I just said kind of impossible, right? So we needed that standardization. And we also weren't really thinking about what it would look like with rights issues in networked environments. But with standardized right statements, we can leverage it now. So you can see on the slide, if we had to code this, how confusing it would be to the user, how it would be hard to discover, but also it would keep us pretty siloed. So if we go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about now with this possibility of statements, how much we can be interacting with other networked partners, such as the Digital Library of the Middle East, a couple other examples here on the slide. This is what's possible when we apply the right statements to the individual items in our collection. So these are all, I believe, DPLA contributors, all making concerted efforts to use the standardized right statements. And I think it may even be a requirement at this point so if you wanted your content to get into maybe a major aggregator, you would need to do this so we can, you know, facilitate this kind of discovery. So let's go to the next slide. And it allows me to also talk about the use of APIs. And again, that being a major benefit now of of network environments and being able to have metadata that can be queried, is particularly rights-related metadata that can be queried via an API to maybe take something from DPLA or Library of Congress and put it somewhere else, right? And have that consistency of the right statements be carried forward. So I think the last slide here is a specific example of how this works in practice, which you may be familiar with and may even be using all the time, which is the way that DPLA has leveraged this with its work with Wikipedia and I think Wikimedia or Wikipedia Commons. So DPLA has long been contributing their digital assets to Wikipedia Commons, which requires the right statements. And so if we had not taken the time to employ these right statements at the item level, there would be a lot of great content that people are discovering via Wikimedia Commons that comes from, you know, maybe a very great archive that, you know, no one else might have discovered that if they hadn't come through the front door of that archive, the digital front door. Instead, they're discovering over here and having that consistency of knowing how they can use it. They may never come to that particular digital collection, but they're still getting the benefit of it. So I think ending there with Wikimedia Commons is kind of a great example of a larger, you know, expansive benefit effects of applying these right statements. So hopefully I've been able to convince you of the benefit of this work, not just for individual researchers, but for larger discovery and then for this larger societal goal of sharing our cultural heritage at scale. So I'll hand it over now to Gabe, who will talk about the resources that are there for implementation.
Thanks, Monica. Yeah, I'm going to overview some tools and resources that can make the implementation process easier. There are already an array of excellent resources available. However, in the past, there were access and discoverability challenges. Many resources were difficult to locate on the open web or were accessible only to those already involved in this work. Furthermore, there was no directory that sought to collect all of these resources. So I'm going to start with a resource created by the DPLA Right Statements Working Group, the Rights Portal. This website aggregates and makes discoverable statement implementation resources. The resources it collects are listed through this table, which is searchable and is facetable via several categories. It should be said that it should be said that one reason right statements implementation can be complicated is that this process can be conceptualized as a number of distinct steps, not all of which your institution may need to undertake. For example, there's copyright status determination, determining the copyright status of an individual work. Then there's right statement selection, determining which rightstatements.org statement or Creative Commons license should be applied based on an object's copyright status. Then there's risk assessment, the evaluation of institutional risk assumed when digitally disseminating a particular object. No one resource covers all of these steps comprehensively, but the rights portal seeks to clarify which resources can be used for which steps. Through the keywords facet, you can isolate resources relating to a specific implementation step. Through the type facet, you can isolate resources in a particular format. Is it a video, a graphic, a text guide, or an article? You can also facet by institution or browse by author. Here are some widely used resources collected by the rights portal. We'll start with charts and visual tools. While all of these resources are similar in their format, they differ in their scope and in which implementation step they cover. First, we have the hurdle chart, a comprehensive and authoritative guide to copyright status determination, updated yearly. This is the Minnesota Digital Library's Rights Review, which Molly Huber, a former member of this group, worked on with Minnesota Digital Library colleagues. It overviews the subset of statements approved for use through the Minnesota Hub and covers both copyright status determination and statement selection. This is the right statement selection tool, which I made through PA Digital in consultation with lawyer Brandy Carl. It comprehensively covers statement selection, overviewing each statement and its correct usage, as well as the legal logic is meant to apply. Its legal logic is meant to apply nationally. It also includes clickable links to each statement when viewed in a browser, allowing it to function as an alternate rightstatements.org interface. Here's UMiami's Assigning Statements Matrix, which covers copyright status determination and statement selection, and includes workflows for both US and Cuban copyright. This is Orbis Cascade Alliance's Right Statements Decision Matrix, which also spans status determination, statement selection, and additionally touches on risk assessment by including more cautious and least cautious options. The rights portal also indexes many video resources, such as this alternative intro to right statements session from Brandy Carl and Linda Ballinger at PA Digital. And here are some essential text resources that you should definitely explore if you want to know as much as possible about the statements. Note that all of the resources I highlighted here are linked through this presentation, as well as, of course, indexed through the rights portal. Finally, it should be noted that the cultural heritage copyright community itself is an amazing resource. The rights portal includes a community connections section that aims to bring those visiting the site into existing practitioner networks. And you're welcome to email our group and get involved at this email address. And I'm going to pass it off to Julia.
Thank you, Gabe. There are some universal challenges to implementing standardized rights statements in digital collections, but none of them are insurmountable. These are some of the common ones we've all struggled with. So initially, you need to make sure everyone has the same working knowledge of the rights statements by educating your stakeholders, and sometimes that includes copyright basics, so that you all have a shared understanding of what the statements actually mean and how they can be applied. One of the most frequent points of confusion about the statements is whether rights statements and licenses, like Creative Commons, are interchangeable. They are not. Rights statements are metadata describing the copyright status of the work as best you know it. They are not a substitute for licenses, which are centered around reuse. Until recently, 1923 was the magic year before which most copyrighted works fell into the public domain. This was never entirely true. For instance, unpublished works have a longer copyright protection than published works. And now, every year on January 1st, new materials enter the public domain, but not everything. Copyright is complex. We all know this. And we need to actively and regularly look at our holdings to determine if they've passed into the public domain. End users want an answer to the question, can I use this? You've heard that several times today. But metadata assignment requires you think about what information about use and status am I conveying to the potential user? Providing clear information is helpful in both cases. And finally, you have to get everyone on board. Some institutions are more cautious and risk averse and will opt for assigning the most conservative rights statements for works. Some institutions don't see assigning rights statements or active copyright analysis as a priority, or think it will be just too much work. Next slide, please. There are also challenges in the application of statements. Lots of organizations want to apply rights statements in chunks at the folder level, if you will, especially among archivists and others who are believers in the less process, more product approach to collections. That works fine for physical items, but not necessarily for digital. Digital objects need accurate descriptive metadata, rights statements included, for individual items, because that's how most of our discovery platforms work. The copyright not evaluated statement can be used as a placeholder. I don't have time to individually apply rights statements, but I need to have one, so I'm just going to throw CNE on it and come back later. This is meant to be a temporary label, so there needs to be a plan to review and revise works with this statement. As I mentioned on the last slide, there's a need to assess the risk tolerance of the organization before applying the statements. Each organization is going to approach it differently, and you need to make decisions that all of your stakeholders are comfortable with. Next slide, please. And finally, there are technical challenges. How do you get the statements into the records? Manually, one by one, or by using a bulk edit tool if you're lucky enough to have one? Also, how many fields are you going to use? Some of the tools Gabe showed you come from organizations that require more than just the standardized rights field. Will you also allow a rights field with local information that's more nuanced in your record? If so, will that information be publicly viewable? And will there be any free text fields? These are all things you need to think about before you start a project. How are these fields going to be mapped for interoperability in your OAI feed or for export or harvesters? How much information do you display in the record? Mapping decisions will impact this. There's lots to think about and prepare for before you embark on a project like this. But others have gone before you, and I hope you have gotten a sense from our talk what kind of resources there are to help, including all of us on the working group. So I'm going to stop there. We'll stop the recording. Thank you all for coming, and we will do some question and answers if you have any.